Okay, y'all ready?
Let's do it.
All right, sounds good. So today I wanted to talk about motivation and how to sustain motivation throughout graduate school and throughout the academic process as well. And I think it's an important topic because the reality is that grad school is really difficult and research can be really difficult, and it takes quite a bit of sustained energy over time to be successful. Um, and just to be real, this is something that I've struggled with over the years. I've felt like my motivation at times has been really strong, and then at times it's waned. And for me, I think part of the struggle is that research is so time consuming, and it takes a long time to get from start to finish on a research project, from coming up with the idea to submitting the IRB to collecting data to then writing up the manuscript, submitting it, responding to reviewer critiques, and then sometimes even when I'm done, I'll feel like I've put in all that work and I've just made a very small increment in the amount of scientific knowledge that we've gained, or I struggle to see to connect the dots between what I did research wise and whether it's really helping people or improving the world. So that's what I'd love to talk about today, and I think too, as I work at a Research One university and have graduate doctoral students who are doing their research, and I think sometimes this struggle with motivation can be exacerbated for graduate students, especially if they're not aiming at an academic job. So if they want to be clinicians, for example, they may even struggle more kind of connecting the dots between what they're doing research-wise and their overall career goals. So I wanted to just start off by asking, what did motivation look like for you in graduate school, and did you ever struggle with motivation, and what helped keep you going?
Yeah, motivation. I definitely waxed and waned in motivation. I think when I started grad school, I was motivated by this idealistic dream that I was going to change science or society. And that quickly gave way to the pragmatic hope that one day I'd find a job. And so my motivation to change the world went away pretty fast. And I started feeling the pressure of trying to find a job and being competitive. And so, I think in the later part of grad school, I was really motivated to publish and to try to publish in good journals. And so that was a big motivator for me. But it is really hard to engage in a process that takes years before you finally see that output. And then, Josh, like you said, that output might be read by, a dozen of your closest colleagues, and then, family members won't even read what you do. And so yeah, I think motivation was a struggle. One of the things I tried to do is I tried to keep enough things in the pipeline that if I ever got burned out or tired on one project, I could switch to another. So if I got tired writing something, maybe I could go analyze data from something else or submit a IRB for a new project. So I tried to diversify what I was working on in case I got burned out or tired on a certain project. I think more broadly, I think one of the things that's helped me maintain motivation is actually taking breaks. Sometimes having a small little step back from the constant grind helps me come back refreshed. If I take a little bit of time away, I can get some space, I can come back and kind of be a little bit more refreshed.
Yeah, those are great points, Daryl. Kind of the pragmatic part of it too. I appreciated what you said, that we don't always have to have this lofty idea when it comes to motivation. Sometimes it's just a goal that's ahead of us. And I also like the idea of taking breaks too, and having some kind of a balanced process that can be maintained over time. Donnie, anything you'd like to add about remembering what motivation was like for you when you were going through grad school?
Yeah, I've noticed a few shifts at different points in my career. Grad school, I think on the positive side, when I first started working with Ev, it was very motivating for me to feel like I was working with someone who was a good writer. And for me, I hadn't really thought of myself as someone who could write for my career, but I liked the idea. And then once I kind of got working with Ev, I was like, oh shoot, like he could teach me how to be a writer. Like I could maybe write a book one day. I could maybe publish an article. Like I could tell even the first time I got feedback from him, or even hearing Josh talk about the type of feedback that he got from Ev, that I had a chance to learn how to do something well. So I think in a certain way, that gave me some energy for the training process, because the specific papers I was working on, I wasn't always as interested in. And so I think, almost as an athlete in my mind, I kind of translated it to, okay, you have to learn the skills and you have to practice and you have to kind of be where you are. And then one day you'll be able to do something that might have a bigger impact, or you'll be able to kind of expand those skills. And so for me, I probably did push off some of my sense of, what I really wanted to do with my life, and what I wanted in a career. I pushed that back and just kind of simplified the training process for myself. So it was later on, some of those bills came due. So I think we'll probably talk about that a bit later. Yeah.
Well, yeah, no, I think you make a great point there in that, sometimes, especially when you're in graduate school, you're having to maybe modulate your interests a little bit or fit your interests with those of your faculty member. It's kind of like a little bit for you, a little bit for your faculty member. And I like how you kind of framed it about focusing on the writing process, almost like you were focusing on your own growth process, and that there was something motivating about engaging in that and improving and developing those skills.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have, I didn't mean to cut you off. Did you have anything else that you were thinking of, Donnie, or thinking about around motivation?
No, I don't think so. But I do remember, just the process of writing my first lit review and the first empirical paper. I don't think I remember ever having a sense that those particular projects were going to kind of make a huge difference. Matter of fact, I was just doing what I could to kind of rise to the bar that Ev was expecting from us. And I was basically just trying to put a good foot forward. And I think in another way, like when I think that was something that Ev actually was pretty good at. Like I think he got to know his students' different kind of motivational styles and would kind of adapt to that. And I imagine that was just, years of, he was in the military, like just having relationships with lots of different kinds of people. And so I think he just kind of intuited some of that. But honestly, for me, the weekly meeting structure was something that helped give me motivation, because I was just generally, again, I'm kind of mentioning prior history as an athlete. I wanted Ev to be happy with my work. Like I looked up to him a lot and wanted to kind of be making movement towards being a good graduate student. So I think honestly, I was pretty motivated to work hard and kind of be in fairly good standing with him, because I really wanted to learn from him. So I think a lot of my initial motivation was more relational, and it was less, I was really interested in forgiveness. I was really interested in humility, but there were some aspects of just academic writing that it wasn't very proximal, like how that would help clients or what this would potentially evolve into. It actually seemed at times a little bit esoteric and kind of removed from actually helping people. So I think in a certain way, the parts that were most motivating for me actually had to do with my relationship with Ev and kind of other people on the team, and feeling, basically wanting to do a good job for other people that I was working with.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Daryl, I wanted to circle back around to something you said, and maybe this could bridge a little bit about thinking about motivation over the long haul, not just graduate school. You had talked about how, some of your motivation happened because of specific things that you wanted to accomplish and what you had to do to get to the place where you could do that. So, a big example for all of us, I think, was getting a job. How do we get our CVs to the point where we could be competitive for a job and don't have to move home with our parents, right? I don't mean anything bad about you, mom and dad, but we all wanted to do that, right? And then, but something I noticed in myself was that I would be really focused on a particular goal, and then once I got it, I kind of struggled a little. My motivation would wane a little bit, and I felt this way in a lot of things, like getting my first job, getting tenure. I'm even experiencing a little bit right now as I have just recently this past year put in all my materials for full professor. I guess what I'm trying to say is I think sometimes I've struggled when my motivation has been tied to particular goals, and then when that goal was achieved, I would experience a dip. Any thoughts on that? Maybe that's just a normal thing, and but curious how you've navigated those ups and downs.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Now, I will admit, after I did get a job, the first paper that I ever had rejected, I smiled, and I was like, well, at least I'm still getting paid, because in grad school, when you get the rejection, you're like, oh man, this is going to make it harder to get a job. And then when you get a job, you're like, oh, okay, well, I'm trying my best, they're not going to stop my paycheck because I got a rejection. But kidding aside, I do think that sometimes when we hit those milestones, so tenure, maybe finishing a big grant, finishing a book, I think oftentimes there is kind of like that post, you kind of finish off the high of this huge accomplishment, and you can kind of feel a little down, you can kind of feel unmotivated. And I think that's a good point that you're talking about. When you're extrinsically motivated to do something, you can kind of have that fallout afterwards. I think what I've tried to do is I've tried to diversify the things that I'm doing, so it's not all tied to one project or one idea or even one identity. And then the second thing is I've tried to invest a little bit more about having fun in the process. So trying to shift the motivation to be a little bit more intrinsically rewarding. So I enjoy writing grants and like coming up with ideas. I enjoy the process of, theoretically moving things around in a paper to try to make conceptual points. And so when I make the process more intrinsically enjoyable, then kind of what I'm working on can be a little bit of a plug and play, because I'm like, oh, okay, I get to do this fun thing again. Working with y'all, collaborating with good colleagues, that's rewarding to me. So I think I've tried to shift to make the process a little bit more intrinsically motivating and enjoyable. And then I think the other thing I've done is I've just realized, we talk a lot about balance, or we talk about, and I'm not sure if balance is the right thing. Maybe we just need to kind of understand it as like rhythms. Like there probably are going to be seasons of life where you're going to be a lot more motivated, and then times where that motivation is going to wane. And there's probably seasons of life where you're going to be a lot more productive, and then seasons of life where you're just not. And just kind of being okay with knowing that there are ebbs and flows, and giving yourself a little bit of a break when that happens.
Yeah, I like that, Daryl. I like the idea of rhythms and being okay with some of those natural flows, because I think that's one thing I'm even aware of as I was asking these questions, kind of that I'm conceptualizing very high motivation as good, and then a little bit lower motivation as not good, right? And maybe the reality is that we all kind of go up and down a little bit. I also liked your idea about the focusing on the process more than the outcome. I think that is a really key point that is important to keep in mind. And related to that, I had a thought that came up for me. I think sometimes I have like unrealistic expectations about how fun the process is going to be, and that too. Sometimes I need to remind myself that it's still work, right?
Yeah.
So I can't expect. Some people ask me like, "Do you like your job?" And I always say yes. I love my job, it's not like I don't like it like I like watching football or playing basketball. It's not like it's still work for me, anyways. So, but I think I've gotten to the point where I'm okay with that.
Yeah, yeah.
Donnie, did you have anything you wanted to add about kind of the ups and downs, the ebbs and flows of motivation, and how you maybe maintain motivation for the long haul?
Yeah. So I think for me, pre-tenure, it was actually kind of easy for me to maintain motivation because it was kind of laid out what I should be spending my time on. And so it was really more a matter of trying to negotiate enough of what I like to do and working with people that I wanted to work with to kind of do those things. So, I remember kind of before we got a job, Josh, you and I kind of did the challenge with Ev, and, we were going to try to submit like 25 papers within a year and a half or whatever. And so for me, like those kind of challenges, like that's fun because it's kind of like test yourself, align it with what you need to do and kind of create a challenging goal that kind of brings cohesion to your group. And, for me, that was enough. And we kind of did something similar pre-tenure. And that was enough to kind of align what we needed to do, to kind of get tenure and kind of be well beyond that bar. So we weren't, just barely squeaking by. So yeah, that was, in a certain way that didn't, I don't think I hit a point where I had to really kind of think about what I was doing until after tenure. And so, I think what I've done since then is I've kind of just treated it like, it's time for me to kind of sit with these feelings. For me, I think it was cueing me into that I had done a lot of the things to train and kind of just get established in a career. But what I hadn't necessarily put thought into is once I get past the various hurdles and have kind of done what I have to do, what do I want to do? And like, what would I view as a meaningful career? And, looking back, when I'm retiring, like, so it was kind of interesting to go to Ev's retirement. Like at the end of my career, what do I want, to kind of have done? And that was, to be honest, I think I'm still kind of figuring that out, but I can tell you one thing. Doubling or tripling my publications isn't at the heart of it. Like that's not the center of what I want to do. I think the kinds of things that have made that list for me, I like doctoral mentoring. I like investing in relationships and other people. So that's rewarding for me. And publishing can be a part of that. Like if we have a challenging thing that we're doing together, that can feel very rewarding for me. But I've kind of had to align with some bigger picture things. Another thing that I've kind of learned that I enjoy is I kind of always like having at least one thing that I'm kind of trying to learn a new skill. So this year, like every Friday, I sit and kind of work with Ken and try to learn some new analyses that are just kind of growing my skills. So there's part of me that kind of always wants to be trying to grow and learn some new things. I've gotten more into like interdisciplinary work. And so I think there's been some exploring of kind of, like I did some of that work with the group at Yale and some of the theologians there. We've done some of the work on like trusting God. And then honestly, there's part of me that's exploring more applied avenues. Like are there, what does it look like? I'm a counseling psychologist. I mean, are there areas where my work could really affect, psychoed or what people are doing in different churches? And so, anyway, but I think to our conversation, I've treated that feeling of kind of being bored or kind of not feeling like I'm at the center of my motivation. Lately, I've just been taking it pretty seriously, and it's like, oh, okay, maybe I need to listen and get a better sense, kind of start to increase the alignment between my heart and my sense of passion and what I'm doing.
I like how you said that. It's almost like you're using those feelings of being bored or restless like as a cue that you might need to do a little bit more work of exploring, uh, what really would be motivating and meaningful for you in terms of your career next steps. I think, and I don't know if you can connect with this, but sometimes I have felt like when getting like the things in graduate school, like getting my CV to a place where I would be competitive for a job, getting tenure, like some of those things are a little stressful and there's a lot of pressure. And I think in some ways, when I look back, I think sometimes I didn't necessarily take the time to allow those thoughts or feelings to surface and to really engage with them and to see what they might have to say to me. So I think that's a great point.
Yeah, it takes a lot. You can spend a lot of energy on things that aren't actually helping much too. So it kind of, I mean, some of the exploration I've done, I mean, some of it's just an utter waste of time in a certain respect. you know, I've started to read a lot more, and I'm reading pretty widely. And at times I realize, like, I'm reading stuff that I'm never really going to write about or do anything with. So I think in a certain way, I feel thankful that Ev kind of focused us on some key outcomes so that we knew how to invest our time and energy in a way that would help us get a job. And later, I think there are just points later on in your life where in order to kind of figure out what you really care about, you run the risk of really diffusing some of your focus and, really kind of getting overly spread out. But I'm hoping that will end up being a productive process where I start to hone in on, what really matters to me and what I would do even without some of the extrinsic rewards or kind of some of those things, some of those structures that were in place kind of in our first 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that makes sense. Can I ask a follow-up question? And I'm curious if you have thoughts about this. Do you have any thoughts or advice for someone who, let's say a graduate student who comes into the program and at some point realizes that they don't want an academic career? Maybe they're moving more towards something more applied or counseling related. And so there isn't as much of a pressure to like learn the research, to become skilled at research, learn the research process, publish a lot. And so maybe there's a little bit more of a struggle to see a clear line between all the research work they're doing and what they eventually want to do. Any thoughts about motivation in that case?
I think that's a tough one. I remember
Yeah.
kind of while I was going through grad school, one of the things I realized happened for me is because I knew it's what I wanted to do, I kind of started early investing a lot of time and energy, and I aligned my motivation with giving energy to that area. And then I noticed that when I got around to doing my dissertation, I felt very confident in my skills. I had just learned a lot, and I sent Ev a draft. He gave me feedback, and I changed. I made the edits, and we were ready. So it was just an easy process by then because I knew what I was doing. I think the part that's hard is I think for people whose goal is to kind of minimize their time investment on research, the risk you run is that you don't give it enough that you have sufficient skill when it comes time to kind of do your dissertation. And it's really hard to make up all that time and all that ground. Like, my first year, I probably spent 100 hours running, EFAs and correlation matrices for different things on that first project. I just spent so much time, learning and kind of talking with different people on the team, talking with Ev. And so 3 or 4 years later, I was ready. It's hard for me to imagine how to tell someone, the way to give it as little time as possible. So that's a little bit of a warning, but I guess what I would say is if I had to chart that out, knowing what I know now, and I were going to kind of do it, but I knew that I wanted kind of a clinically oriented career. I think what I would say is do your research first and get it done, and if you kind of put it first on your list, then you kind of work on it early, then you won't be in a position of not knowing how much you're going to need to give it. And the other thing I would say is pick an area to read about and to do research on that you really care about clinically, because then everything that you read, you can translate to what you're doing. So if you're really interested in kind of trauma and learning about trauma, I think if you did a project, if you did your dissertation and you could read all of the stuff that you already wanted to read, that would take some of the sting out of it. And then if you work on a team where you've got a productive group, you can get help with things like running analyses and some of those aspects. But the part that's hard to kind of make up for is if you really just don't have the motivation to spend a couple of 100 hours learning about something, I just don't know how you make that work very well.
Yeah, that's a great point. I hadn't thought of it that way. That kind of paradox, where if you put the time in early, the reality is that the process is easier because you're a little bit more about what you're doing versus kind of struggling through the thesis and dissertation.
And the hard part about that, Josh, is for a lot of people that are in that situation, that hits while they're on internship. So the very year where you would actually want the most focus, if you're training if you're wanting to be a clinician, your focus is divided because you actually feel way behind on your research. So it's I think it really is a bit of a paradox, and I see a lot of students kind of get into that situation. So I appreciate the fact that you're kind of bringing that to folks' awareness. But the reality is, I think it's a tough one to do because it's the rare student that can kind of anticipate, okay, I don't like research as much as I like other stuff, but I really want to have my time freed up on internship. And so I'm going to, several years in advance, start investing in this so that I finish early. Like, I would say that's out of 100 people, maybe it's 5 that can do that.
Yeah, makes sense. Daryl, did you have anything to add on that? I know you're not a clinician, so maybe it doesn't apply as much.
Yeah, as the non-clinician, I think the only thing I would say is I would still hope that clinicians would have a sense of how to use and interpret research findings. And so if they completely bail in the research process, are they going to be able to distinguish between empirically valid research and just, what's trending on Instagram? Because I'm hoping that my therapist, anyone's therapist, whoever goes to therapy, knows how to read research and is using empirically based practices. And so I would hope that they're research informed clinicians. Yeah,
that's a great point, Daryl. One other thought that I was thinking about when I was thinking about this topic and preparing for this podcast was that my theoretical orientation is primarily acceptance and commitment therapy. And in ACT, we talk a lot about the difference between values and goals. And so a goal is something that you can kind of do, accomplish, and check it off your list, whereas a value, ACT defines values as these ongoing behaviors that you can engage in over time that are important to you, but they don't ever end. And so, kind of a metaphor that I like to use is values are like heading in a direction on a hike. So values might be like you're heading in the east, you're going east. And then a goal is, like maybe you see a little mountain peak in the distance and you get to it and you kind of check it off. And so I think goals can be important because insofar that they keep you heading in the direction you want to go. If you're kind of seeing these different goals in the distance, they kind of keep you on track for staying true to your values. But I think if you get too locked up into goals and too focused on them, then you can kind of get into the situation that we talked about before, where you're just focusing on accomplishing something. There's sort of a letdown after you do it, and you're also maybe not enjoying the process as much, like Daryl said. So one thing I was curious about, what are some of your key values related to research? Just the things about the research process that are really intrinsically important to you. Do you have a sense of that?
Donnie, you can go first for this one.
When I did my interview with Ev and he kind of asked what I wanted to do in my career, at that point I really didn't know. I wasn't sure, but one thing I knew that I enjoyed across different kind of career experiences was the role of being a mentor, and kind of training. So I think no matter what field I would have been in, I would have kind of liked the role of kind of training and supervision. So I think for me, there are some values and pretty core kind of parts of who I am, that are kind of filled out in the idea of forming teams, helping people train, helping people figure out what they want to do, and find ways of kind of linking, part of being in a doctoral program with their idea, some of their bigger ideas of what they want to do with their lives. I think there's even a spiritual aspect of that for me, of kind of helping people connect with a sense of calling. So yeah, for me, like when I get a little disoriented about what I'm doing, like it's always that I go back to, is like, yeah, I want to be good at that. And I do feel really thankful that I got to work with Ev, because he embodied a lot of the things that I would want to do. Like he was focused on excellence and kind of high quality publications. But, if you get to know Ev a little bit, like he gives away a lot of time. Like I don't even know how many speaking engagements he does each year, a lot of them for free, does a lot of interviews, so he's very generous with his time. And so I think in a lot of ways, I've had a chance to work with both Ev and some other people who are very generative. And that's the kind of person I want to be. Like, I hope by the end of my career, not only will I have like a fruitful vita, but I'll just have relationships that have kind of been lifelong with a variety of different kinds of people, and kind of a ease to go into different kinds of communities, and kind of a cultural flexibility to connect with different groups, even if I don't have the exact same values. That kind of what we talk about with like cultural span. So those are some of the things that, and I guess I'll say one other thing. I think the doldrums of research seems kind of boring at certain times, but like, what do you get for that? At the end of a career, having a research program that's highly influential, what have you kind of gained? I think when it comes down to it, for me, it's an issue of credibility. Like, are you a person who the way that you kind of engage reality is you've developed a discipline where people from a wide range of groups and perspectives trust you because there's a level of rigor in the way that you think about things and the way that you kind of put your ideas to a test, that there's just really high trust. So that's something, I would, as a scholar, I think I would want that to be true. It's not just that Donnie, kind of says what he thinks and kind of games science to kind of back that up, but that there's a use of science to really sharpen ideas and to kind of establish like higher levels of professional credibility. But I think that takes it seems to take decades more than, it's not like something you can establish on a single paper.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Thanks for sharing that, Donnie.
Mm-hmm.
What about you, Daryl?
Yeah, Donnie, I love that. And Josh, I love the metaphor you used kind of a direction. In grad school, when I think I was kind of struggling and trying to think about what I wanted to do next, I created this document, this Word document called a compass. And I go back to it every year, and I spend a little bit of time every year revisiting it and like kind of refreshing it. And like on the first page, I have 4 core values that I try to anchor my professional work in. And so those values, for me, and these are just for me, are integrity, excellence, passion, and inclusion. And so under those I'll have goals that kind of flow from those. So for like integrity, I would want to make sure that I'm doing all of my research with like the best practices in the field and like the highest level of accountability. So for excellence, for example, I would want to make sure that I publish in the best journals and conduct the very highest quality research. For passion, I would want to try to inspire others to kind of get passionate about their research and find a vocation that matches with their values. For inclusion, I want to make sure I work with a diverse set of collaborators and make my research accessible to people who could benefit from it. So I kind of think about these values, and then I try to set goals every year. But I have to reflect on, what are my values that are guiding these goals? And more often than not, I don't meet all my goals. I'm kind of an ambitious guy, and so I set these high, lofty goals. And sometimes I hit them, and that feels great. And other times I get close. But the values kind of operate as like the boundaries that kind of help direct those goals.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Daryl. And I'll just add real quick a couple of values that I think guide my work. One I stole from Mike McCullough, who's an excellent researcher. At the time, he was working in the University of Miami, where I did my internship, so we got to hang out a little bit. And I asked him what motivated his research one time when we were having lunch, and he said, I always remember this, he said, I really want to discover things that are new to science. And I was kind of, from a researcher perspective, I thought that was awesome. And so I'm kind of a naturally curious person, and so that guides my my work. I want to be pushing boundaries. I want to be thinking about new ideas and connecting ideas from different fields. And then the other thing I think that guides me is it's kind of a basic thing too, but I want to help people. I think that's partly why I went into counseling psychology in the first place. I wanted to develop some skills for helping people who were struggling emotionally, and to help them, live the life that they wanted to live. So a lot of my work, again, as a counseling psychologist, is connected to, helping people who are struggling with mental health issues, helping figure out how to do therapy better and in a more effective way. So as we're kind of wrapping up, is there anything else that we haven't touched on about motivation that you'd like to add before we ended?
I think I would just say that a strong sense of motivation just could look different for each person, right? It is probably important to align your motivation with your values. Some people could be really motivated and write a lot of papers or give a lot of talks. Other people could be motivated, have a strong motivation to pour into one really important paper or to develop a great clinical set of skills. And so just realizing that motivation could look different for each person.
That's a great point, Daryl. Yeah, motivation is not a one-size-fits-all thing. So, you've listened to some of us share a little bit about what was motivating for us through the years, but yeah, it doesn't necessarily mean that will fit for you. It's something that we each need to find out for ourselves.
I think for me, there's almost the mountaintop experiences where you get a vision of where you're going in your career and what you want for your life. And I think in a certain way, for me, those haven't come. It's probably something like once a year or once every 2 years. And so I kind of try to make sure I capture that snapshot, like whether it be journaling or somehow kind of having a way of reminding myself of that. But then the day-to-day, there's a lot of writing and research. There's a lot of plotting. There's a lot of like make a list and you just do the next thing. And to be honest, if I waited to feel inspired, like truly inspired,
Right.
it would be rare that I would ever make much progress. And so there's a certain, a lot of like my day-to-day experience is actually making sure that I have enough of a connection to remind myself, this is why I'm doing this. Like, this is important. And it's, and so I think there are a lot of just tricks to do that. Like, I think one aspect is working in teams, like just being with other people is a reminder. Like if I'm having a bad day, chances are at least one person in the group is, feeling more motivated and can kind of pick me up. So I do think I pull from a lot of the motivational things that I learned in team sports. I pull from those to maintain motivation. So like the one summer before I went to Yale, they sent us this booklet of what we were supposed to do in our workouts. That was the hardest summer of my life because I was basically supposed to go down to my garage and look at this, one pager. I didn't have access to the high school weight room. I just had, this $120 set of weights, and I was supposed to be maintaining this workout, and it included, about 45 minutes a day of working out and then some running stuff, which is not atypical. I mean, I'd been doing that for 6 years. But it was horrible. Like it was the worst training experience of my life. I didn't like it. Like everything I liked about training, I didn't like that summer. And so, I think that's an example. So for me, like when I can tell I'm getting into a space that's motivationally kind of bankrupt, I just go back to my prior experiences of all the things that you can do that kind of ease things. And I think being with people, I think, we talked last time about having consistent writing habits and just doing it every day and kind of getting a routine that you like. Like all of those things are kind of little tricks that help you when you're, to use that metaphor, when you're in the valley. And then, I think I do try to make sure that I have times where I just rest and get away from the daily routine and try to get a bigger picture sense. And, honestly, like when we do our research retreat, that's a little bit of like one of those seasons of kind of trying to see the big picture. And even that, I find that easier to do with other people than just by myself.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah, a great reminder about the importance of relationships in helping us stay motivated. Well, thanks, guys. This has been a great conversation, and I really appreciate your thoughts on keeping and maintaining motivation in research. Until next time, we'll sign off.
All right.
Nice job, Josh.
Thank you.